Not long ago, we covered some of Pokemon's most long-standing titans that have dropped to the depths that would have been little more than an absurd joke during their heyday. We've seen things we're still struggling to believe. The OU Pokemon Tyranitar fell as low as RU, where the 5-time Uber Deoxys defense still currently resides. We felt we covered many of the most significant drop-offs induced by the insanity of Generation 9, including both forms of Thundurus, but there's only so many you can include in one video. So to continue that itch that keeps popping up given the bizarre nature of Gen 9, honestly, rarely has a generation felt so almost tangibly unreal. We have returned to give you more Pokemon that dropped off. This time though, it's not that we thought they'd never drop off. During their heyday, the prospect of them being less than the best around also seemed quite unlikely, but more so we didn't expect these Pokemon to drop off this far. So join us in our surreal tale of more Pokemon that we never thought would fall off. Now, these other Pokemon wouldn't have fallen off if they had the right tools. Luckily, the sponsor of this video has the right tools for our hair trimming needs, because once again, this video is sponsored by Manscaped. This Father's Day, give dad the gift of a smooth facial hair finish by getting him the Handyman. I personally like this one since I've been using it as my main face shaver for over a year now. The Handyman has an advanced dual blade, equipped with a standard foil shaver, as well as a long hair leveler blade. The Handyman will knock down up to 3 days of growth. Say goodbye to patchy beards and hello to a clean, well-groomed appearance. I bring this thing literally everywhere I go since it's so compact and portable, thanks to its rechargeable battery, and best of all, it's waterproof. So it's an easy cleanup after I'm done, no matter what hotel or Airbnb I'm at. But that's not all. Help dad with his nose itching by cleaning up his nose and ear hair with the Weed Whacker 2.0. With a powerful 7,000 RPM motor and a 360-degree rotary dual blade system, the Weed Whacker 2.0 helps dad tackle his unwanted hair like a pro. That also features a rechargeable battery for up to 45 minutes of use and is also waterproof. So ditch the boring coffee mug for Father's Day and gift dad with Manscaped and watch his grooming game go from caveman to gentleman. Head over to manscaped.com and get 20% off plus free international shipping when you use promo code FALLSWIPE at checkout. Gen 9 was actually going quite well for Snorlax up until recently. It got itself banned from NU during the Teal Mask DLC. We're long past the point of it being strange for an old Pokemon that previously towed over everything to find itself in a modern generation's lower tiers, even as far down as NU. Pure normal types are far from what they used to be. In Gen 1 at their peak, just about nothing could switch into them, as Snorlax boasted the game's strongest Body Slam, Hyper Beam, and the strongest move in the game outright in its self-destruct. The saving grace is that while the higher tiers are now geared towards different Pokemon, these ancient titans generally find themselves bringing their skills to dominate these lower tiers, whose metas more resemble their glory days, if not necessarily through similar surroundings, then at least through power level. It's always amusing to see something with huge stats that's now outclassed drop to a lower tier and absolutely crush everything in sight before getting axed. Gen 9 Lax was a classic case of this time-honored tradition, as were Lax's stints in NU and RU in Gens 8 and 7 respectively. Nothing like good old Curslax shaping the metagame around it, even in the face of Gen 9's insane power creep. Or more accurately, Gen 9's insane power creep up until that point, because the Indigo Disc DLC came around, and what did Gen 9 add? Why, more insane power creep, of course. This set Snorlax tumbling past even NU, landing it all the way down in PU for the first time. This alone would have ensured Snorlax's place in this video. Here's a Pokemon that wasn't just a defining member of OU for the first 3 generations, but incredibly strong even in Ubers in those generations. Lax's unmatched reign over GSC OU is well known, with an almost utter dearth of meaningful weaknesses, but less known is the fact that these same traits are what also ensure it to be the single best Pokemon even in Ubers, even more than Mewtwo. You can't hurt it on the special side, there are almost no good fighting moves, so the physical side doesn't work much either. You have to try and stall it because you won't out-offense it without the risky explosion route, and even putting it in the Mew Mew and Mewtwo-laden Uber's environment doesn't change this. Questions of, so why is the standard OU metagame not just Ubers aside, Lax also was a decent OU Pokemon during the 4th generation, even if it wound up falling by the wayside as the metagame developed. It would have fallen to UU if usage-based tiering had continued, but would have been banned from the tier in about 2 seconds. It then established itself as one of the very best, and for quite some time the best Pokemon in Gen 5 UU. Especially impressive given the litany of fighting types in that metagame, and excelled in the tier again in Gen 6, the tier's most common hits bouncing off of its bulk while struggling to withstand hits like its choice band returns. Thus, seeing Lax in PU was, while harsh, not surprising, given the surreal cascade of major threats in lower tiers so characteristic of Gen 9. It seemed like PU was just the latest lowest tier for Lax to comfortably make its home. However, Gen 9 has cranked the surrealism so high that even PU is beyond Lax's reach now. That's right, it is thought of and thus used so little in the tier, it isn't even part of it anymore. It is untiered. This goes beyond not being good. This means it is actively recommended to not use Snorlax in any metagame. To go from the single best Pokemon in a generation, including Ubers, all the way to too pathetic for PU is why the word tragedy was invented. In Black and White 1, the fear wasn't just of dragons, but of fighting types, which were running wild and pummeling the tier into oblivion. Nothing like a nice stab move to rip through these obnoxious defensive staples Ferrothorn, Heatran, and Tyranitar. Of these fighters, Terrakion was the scariest, because it didn't just have fighting stab, but rock stab as well. Fighting and rock famously having wonderfully complementary coverage, but usually fighters have to supplement their fighting stab with a rock move that's just not as powerful. From Rock Slide Machamp in GSC to Hidden Power Rock Breloom in Advance to Stone Edge Lucario in DPP. This is generally how it went, but now you had a threat that was pretty much as fearsome throwing around rock moves as it was fighting moves. Go ahead, have fun trying to switch rock resist into monsters which so thoroughly obliterated steals, and just as importantly, had the sheer raw strength to overwhelm pretty much anything that didn't resist it. So you couldn't find a happy middle ground of, well, ground types either. Even the mighty Hippowdon wasn't something you wanted switching into Terrakion's close combat. Was there a ground type that could take close combat? Well, yes, Gliscor, but by virtue of being half flying, it wasn't taking Stone Edge well. Even with its amazing physical defense, Choice Band and Swords Dance Terrakion famously shredded it. You could go with Nidoqueen or Golurk, and players were so bereft of Terrakion answers, so desperate to find a way to prevent it from eating them alive, that these Pokemon, which were not good, were experimented with nevertheless. Of course, the opposite was just as true. Enjoy switching a flying type into this close combat spammer when it was so effortlessly shredded with Stone Edge, while the rock neutral Psychics and Ghosts were just as terrified of it, despite their neutrality thanks to Terrakion's immense strength. Oh, and that's not all. Terrakion was incredibly fast. Wall breakers of its caliber were just about never as speedy as its superb base 108, which made it incredibly easy for it to find opportunities to blast opponents apart. It excelled both at wall breaking and late game sweeping. It was capable of withstanding Earthquake from its go-to check Gliscor, and with its special defense boost in Sand, it actually picked up a niche as an outstanding Volcarona answer. Then Black and White 2 came around and Terrakion seemed like it slowed down. Players were now quicker to use it as a lead since it had gained access to Stealth Rock, and it seemed like with new competition from Keldeo and the excellent new check Landorus Therian, Terrakion's glory days were over. But this was a Fugazi. Keldeo wasn't competition, it was one of Terrakion's best partners, the two delighting in pairing up to bombard the opponent with fighting power. Landorus Therian was a good check to be sure, but even its defensive sets did not enjoy taking banded Stone Edges, and would be overwhelmed late game by an SD boosted Terrakion, especially if it also ran Life Orb or before the gem ban, Rock Gem. Terrakion was a set whose inherent traits were so superb, so ferocious, it seemed difficult to imagine it ever slowing down. Even when Generation 6 came around and introduced Fairy types, it was still a major OU threat. What were Fairy types after all but another fighting resist that shook in terror at the prospect of its Stone Edges? Okay, sure, the signs were already there in Gen 6, where Terrakion's lower OU usage actually meant it dropped to UU, but the hilarity of this prospect was matched by the ferocity with which it got banned from the tier, effortlessly shredding it to ribbons just like you'd imagine it would have at its peak in Gen 5. However, it made sense that in the Fairy and Speed Crep Gen 7, Terrakion would fit into UU just fine alongside fellow past OU stalwarts Scizor and Latias. That's how things went. These kinds of Pokemon would dominate OU, then settle into UU, and after an initial period of being broken or at least suspect, find their new home there. Terrakion actually did use this usual trajectory one better. It got itself banned from UU again in Generation 8. Keldeo who? So if there was any Pokemon that seemed like it'd be able to resist the tide of Gen 9's insane power creep, at least a little bit, to some sort of meaningful effect, like continuing its place in UU, it seemed that would be Terrakion. Its stats and stab combinations seem to be eternally UU at worst, especially with how scary it'd be when terrestrializing. However, this idea was in adherence to the previous standard, a standard which Generation 9 upturned with devilish glee in the form of its hyper min-max new Pokemon, one of which was even a paradox form of Terrakion, Iron Boulder. Indeed, Iron Boulder is what caused Terrakion's extreme fall from grace. Everyone was so obsessed with it. Terrakion's usage dropped off a cliff and smacked off every rock jutting out on the way down, aka it couldn't find a new tier to land in. Terrakion going past UU and landing in RU would have already been really weird, yet normal when taken by Gen 9 standards. However, that wasn't Terrakion's, pardon the pun, rock bottom. It didn't even land in NU, which would have been outrageous. It landed in PU. Of course, Terrakion was broken beyond belief in PU and was banned immediately. We're not quite at the level of power creep where Terrakion is an iconic PU Pokemon. Not yet, at least. But the fact it was even there in the first place was just mind-boggling. Slightly less mind-boggling was Terrakion landing in and getting banned from NU, which it did not long after. Nowadays, Terrakion has risen to RU proper via usage. But just think about the sentences you're hearing and how they are completely serious. These used to be jokes, but in this generation, Terrakion has been banned from PU, banned from NU, and risen to RU via usage. It sounds like some sort of joke made about future power creep. Haha, Terrakion and PU. Except it's just straight up real. Meanwhile, Iron Boulder has been banned from UU. Fun. At least Terrakion is legit in RU now, so there's some consolation. The pseudo-legendary Salamence has been synonymous with the higher tiers, broadly referring to the trio of standard OU, the tier above Ubers, and the tier below UU. Since Generation 3, rocking its nearly endless litany of superb traits to success across many a tier, sure it didn't last in OU forever, but it was Terrakion-esque in that once it wasn't going to last in OU anymore, also largely thanks to the influx of fairy types, its stats were just too good to see it dropping below UU. Then again, that was with the previous standard in mind, but look at where Salamence has come from. It was a top tier OU threat in Gen 3. It was so good in Gen 4 it got banned, and it was very good in Gen 5 OU as well. And it had multiple niches and Ubers across those gens too. Unlike something like Terrakion, Salamence had a lot more diversity to its game too. Where something like Terrakion was going to blast you with close combat and Stone Edge every time, despite the sheer power, you at least knew what was coming at you. With Salamence, half the issue was that it also packed this power, but was incredibly unpredictable as well, which exacerbated the issue even further. There's a reason it was given the nickname Guessments at the peak of its power in Gen 4. It mostly went Dragon Dance or mixed across 3 gens, mostly the first 2, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. Gen 3 also saw Choice Band Ments as one of its most fearsome wall breakers, and sometimes even all-out defensive Wish Ments, leveraging Intimidate to the fullest. Gen 4 mostly stuck to these 2 sets, but the disparity between answers to them was game-changing, and even these sets had a variety to them. Like if that Mixed Ments was going to pull out a Roost on the Switch right when you thought you had weathered the storm by making it withstand recoil from Stealth Rock, Sand, and Life Orb, or if it would outrage you instead, ensuring it had fierce Dragon Stab even after Draco Meteor had brought it to -2 special attack. Sometimes Mixed Ments and DD Ments would combine. First you Draco Meteor and smack them really hard, then later you pull out an unexpected Dragon Dance and sweep. Then in Gen 5, Salamence gained the Moxie ability and became one of OU's most notorious late game cleaners with its Choice Scarf set. Its Mega Form took it to Ubers proper, where it utterly dominated, with there being a time period in Gen 6 where many top players thought it was too good not to use. Its base form wasn't going to be rocking OU with Dragon Stab anymore thanks to the fairy types, but it took its talents to UU, where, largely off the strength of its nearly unstoppable Dragon Dance set, it got itself banned. It seemed only right, again like Terrakion, for such a beast to get canned from the lower tiers as soon as Power Creep deemed it unfit for standard play. Mence repeated this trick in Generation 7, becoming even more vicious with Z moves, enabling Fierce Flying Stab, Supersonic Sky Strike, racking up its second UU ban list appearance. It finally settled into UU proper in the Z move-less Gen 8, and there it was one of the most elite Pokemon, boasting a superb mix of offense and defense, especially with its newfound access to heavy-duty boots and Flying Stab in either Hurricane or Dual Wing Beat. Gen 9 though? Well, even putting aside the Paradox form Roaring Moon, Salamence wasn't going to be making a return to OU play. But how about UU? Yeah, about that. UU has become a tier where Latios is not just present, but completely palatable, and thus Salamence has dropped past UU for the first time and landed in RU. Thankfully, it's good in RU. Draco metering and dragon dancing as ever. Again, we're not quite yet in the realm of complete madness, but for Salamence to ever drop past UU was the type of joke you'd make about Gen 20, not the reality you'd expect for Gen 9. The min-maxing of Gen 9 cannot be overstated in how it has displaced these previously consummate top-tier pokes in favor of greater extremes. Fellow flying-type intimidator Gyarados has followed Salamence down this dark path, plummeting past prosperity, but it has plunged even further into the fathomless depths of the Tearing Rung's tenebrous shadows. Gyarados wasn't always a superstar, but was always solid, a consistent presence in the first 2 generations of UU before achieving OU status in Gen 3. It struggled with its damage output since it relied on hidden power flying and didn't quite have Mence's immense attack stat to compensate for the low base power, and sometimes even eschewed hidden power flying for alternate coverage. No matter what it did, it'd be flawed in some way, but it was also unique. However, in Generation 4, the physical special split allowed Gyarados to finally wield Water Stab off of its superior attack stat, and sometimes Choice Band, crushing teams with its excellent blend of coverage and power, as well as a nasty, potentially game-breaking 20% flinch rate. Bolstering its ability to smack the opponent around was a great defensive profile, anchored by Intimidate alongside a fighting resistance, an excellent foil to the many close combats flying around. Dragon Dance Gyarados was one of Generation 4's most defining, fearsome sweepers. Then Generation 5 came around and bolstered Gyarados with Permanent Rain, making it even more ferocious. And if it really wanted to go nuts, it could also swap Intimidate for Moxie, which also enabled it to occasionally run a Scarf set, giving its rain attack deceptive depth. In Gen 6, it dropped to UU as per the norms of Power Creep, but also as per those same norms, there it excelled, with the power of its Dragon Dance set propelling it to similar success. Mega Gyarados also continued Gyarados' usage and prowess in OU, its half dark typing, extra power, stab crunch, and unaware ignoring mold breaker ability, making it a particularly fierce threat to stall teams, while its new bulk let it excel in plowing through offense as well. It even had the slightest of niches and ubers, with Taunt bolstering its anti-stall prowess further, which it repeated in Generation 7, where Mega and Base Gyarados alike were significant presences in OU. The latter now especially scary with Flynium Z, and indeed Flynium Z's power was what led to its ban from UU this time around. Gyarados returned to UU without Z moves in Gen 8, but this time with the option of heavy duty boots to ignore its longtime foe Stealth Rock, and with amazing new coverage and Power Whip, letting it throttle previous answers like Rotom Wash and Quagsire. Once again, it seemed like Gyarados was a quintessential former OU turned UU star Pokemon. However, with its lower attack stat, it was conceivable a time would come where it might drop to RU, though it seemed like the first go around was likely to end in a ban. However, enter Gen 9 and all we know about it, and yes, Gyarados did indeed find itself used in RU. The first time around in the Teal Mask DLC, it actually got banned from the tier, par for the course as expected, and it was nice to see Gyarados still crushing it. However, Gen 9 wasn't done yet, and with the Indigo Disc DLC, Gyarados was returned to the new throes of RU. There, it's quite a decent Pokemon, doing typical Gyarados things, but with the new spin of Terastallization, letting it unleash Flying Terra Blast or occasionally bug for Slowbro and Reuniclus. It's a potent threat, but not a Pokemon slapped onto teams too easily. It's difficult to switch into battle since any damage it sustains won't be recovered and thus might impede its sweep, meaning it has to be held back for some time and then commit to the sweep. Not a Pokemon for every team then. As a result, it isn't used that much, and horror of horrors, Gyarados was no longer sufficient even for RU proper. It dropped all the way down down to Enyu. Fortunately, the hilarious image of Enyu Gyarados was matched by its utter destruction of the tier. It wasn't an instant ban, as Enyu has gotten to the point where Gyarados wasn't crushing everything through stats alone as it would have been before, but it didn't take too long either, as the tier wasn't well equipped to handle Gyarados' Dragon Dance antics when backed by Sub, Taunt, and various unpredictable Terra types. Still, Gyarados falling to Enyu, even if it did get banned from the tier, is a major fall off for a long-standing Pokemon that's previously never been lower than Yu. And before we get to our final Pokemon, we have an honorary Pokemon, and that is Tornadus Incarnate. Torn is currently untiered, just like Snorlax, which on the one hand is baffling, given that it is such an incredibly fast, powerful Pokemon with fearsome stab and coverage. And on the other hand, the reason it's an honorary mention is that it hasn't exactly experienced a major drop-off, at least relative to its previous trajectory. Torn was at its best when spamming its 100% accurate Hurricanes under Gen 5's permanent rain, but even there it was a UU Pokemon, since it was on the more specific side. Not a knock towards its OU viability, of course, but in UU, it struggled with a stab that was so famously unreliable, packing the same accuracy as the dreaded Focus Blast that often found its way into its moveset. Thus, it opted for the more accurate but far weaker Acrobatics set, which had their positives, but were often a frustrating compromise for their lower power. And when it opted for the strength of Hurricane, it was often let down, since it lacked its Therian form's regenerating longevity to make up for it. Thus, Tornadus repeated its UU status in Gen 6, then dropped to RU in Gen 7, but was banned for absolutely brutalizing the tier, to be expected. And then the same happened in Gen 8, but with NU. For Gen 9 to come along and knock it all the way down to untiered though, that's colder than any Bleak Wind Storm. Even this more accurate option isn't enough to save it at this point, and even if it packed Hurricane's higher power, it probably wouldn't do much good either. Staraptor was once the ultimate banless Pokemon. It was comforting, reassuring. No matter what insane power creep the game would throw at you, you could rest knowing that Staraptor would bludgeon Yu into oblivion with its brain-blasting Brave Birds, cranium-crushing close combats, and death-effectuating double edges. It was a monstrous force all the way back in its native Generation 4, and that's before it gained Reckless in Generation 5 to power its stabs up to truly obscene heights. Forget being afraid of power creep, this was power creep. Raptor wielded it to forceful effect en route to gaining that BL status once again in Gens 5, 6, and 7. No matter how much faster and stronger Yu got, it seemed it wouldn't be able to withstand the Staraptor attack. It was going to throw on a Choice Band or Choice Scarf and smash through bulkier or faster teams respectively with great ease. It would have been tremendous with just its 3 main moves, but it also had the momentum grabbing U-turn to give it yet another incredible weapon. Plus, it could even work Final Gambit into its Choice Scarf set, allowing it to adapt based on the matchup. Facing a bulky team, Scarf Raptor won't do much against with its attacks. Final Gambit against a bulky poke, and suddenly it's of immense value, having gotten you a massively advantageous trade. Facing offense, Brave Bird away. We all knew Staraptor, the perpetual BL, wouldn't really last forever. At some point, Yu would get fast and strong and bulky enough for its reckless antics to not be overpowering. We dreamed of the day where Staraptor was just a good old UU Pokemon that seemed entirely plausible and fair. Eventually, once power creep really gets wild, it'll drop to RU for all of 2 seconds as it becomes an unstoppable apex predator before being banned. Then sometime after that, a long time in the future, it'll be RU proper, and so on and so on. Nope. Gen 9 has gone and dropped Staraptor all the way into PU. Forget a real UU niche, forget being banned from RU, even beyond that, forget even having a niche all the way down in NU. In one fell swoop, Staraptor has gone from never being lower than UUBL to being all the way down in the lowest tier. This, more than anything else, feels just utterly wrong. It's like an uncanny valley sort of effect. Something about this reality isn't right. It's like Staraptor went and Reckless Brave Birded an opponent so hard, it crashed somewhere on Mulholland Drive. On the bright side, this reality somewhat parallels our own. PU Staraptor is quite an excellent Pokemon, and one of the most dangerous threats in the tier, but the fact that it's not even close to being broken suggests that something is just a little bit off kilter. Game Freak is definitely messing with more than just the Pokemon games at this point. Conspiracy aside, this is an utterly massive fall, but it makes sense when you realize that PU is being populated by the likes of former OU Pokemon like Bronzong, Gastrodon, and Heracross. Staraptor is still scary, just not in the way it used to be. And that's it. It's not lost on us that we have mentioned 4 flying type Pokemon today. They've really been grounded by the role of power creep Gen 9 has dished out in repeated crashing waves. Some of these are just downright depressing. We know the time comes for most Pokemon, but untiered Snorlax really hits us hard. What other Pokemon have you noticed really fallen off relative to their previous status? We were initially thinking of adding Glastrier as an honorary mention because such a Pokemon being untiered struck us as wild, even though we knew that it wasn't that great before. But then we realized it was already untiered in Gen 8, and though it actually had a decent OU niche, it still wasn't a significant enough of a drop-off compared to what it had been previously. So let us know, and let us know if you agreed with our choices here as well. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our Platinum tier patrons. Thank you so much to Raven Daytona Ring, Sorazan Croxon, Stoneface Colin, Bingleton, Ray Ray, Daniel Isbeast, Glitcherton, Alex Sabo, Funky, Skylaria, and Chica Chihyo for their support of our videos. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.